My name is John. I am 32 years old, and I live in a small house on the outskirts of the city. My life has always been quiet. Work in an office, evenings with a book or a movie, sometimes walks with my dog. But everything changed when I started noticing strange things about the garage across the street. This garage had been there for years. The owner, an elderly man named Robert, seemed like a normal person. We occasionally exchanged a few words when he came to check on his garage. He had always been a bit reserved but friendly. For the last 6 months, however, he had stopped showing up. The garage remained closed, and I began to notice strange things. First, it was the sounds. At night, I could hear a thud coming from the garage, as if someone was pounding on metal. Sometimes it felt like someone was walking around inside. I figured maybe Robert had come back, but his car wasn't in the yard. I even thought maybe he had rented the garage to someone else, but the neighbors said they hadn't seen any new people. One evening I went out to take out the garbage and saw that the garage door was ajar. A faint light was shining through the crack. I went closer to see if everything was all right, but it was quiet inside. I called out to Robert, but there was no answer. Deciding that maybe the door just hadn't closed, I went home. But the next morning, I saw that the garage door was closed again. This struck me as odd. I tried to contact Robert, but his cell phone was unavailable. Neighbors said they hadn't seen him in months. One of them even suggested that Robert might have gone to visit relatives, but no one knew for sure. Meanwhile, the strange noises coming from the garage became more frequent. One night, I even heard someone screaming. It was a muffled but distinct sound. I called the police, but when they arrived, the garage was empty. No footprints, no evidence. The cops said it was probably just a hallucination due to fatigue, but I knew it wasn't. A couple days later, I decided to look in the garage myself. The door was ajar again. Inside, I saw only old tools and boxes. But in the corner, I noticed a hatch leading to the basement. It was locked, but there were fresh scratches around it, as if it had been opened recently. I tried to look inside, but I couldn't see anything. There was only darkness. I could no longer ignore what was happening. The next day, I called the police again. This time, they opened the hatch. In the basement, they found Robert. He was alive, but barely able to stand. Turns out he'd fallen in there months ago and couldn't get out. There were bottles of water and some food in the basement, which probably helped him survive. When Robert was taken to the hospital, he said he slipped on the stairs and fell into the basement. The door slammed shut and he couldn't open it. He screamed and banged on the walls, but no one heard him. It was months later that he was found. But the most interesting part of the story is who or what opened the garage. When the police opened it up and found Robert, he was too weak to explain who could have done it. He claimed he'd spent all that time in the basement alone and couldn't get out. But fresh scratches on the hatch and an ajar garage door suggested that someone had been there after all. Neighbors began to speculate. Some suggested it might have been a vagrant who sometimes slept in the garage without knowing there was a person in the basement. Others thought it could have been someone local who knew about the garage and decided to check it out after hearing strange noises. But the strangest part was what Robert insisted. He hadn't seen or heard anyone while he was in the basement. He only remembered the garage door creaking one night, but he was too weak to scream or knock. The police had never been able to find whoever had opened the garage. No footprints, fingerprints, or other evidence. It remained a mystery. Since then, I've been talking to my neighbors more often and trying to be more aware of what's going on around me. Sometimes danger is closer than you think, and it can be lurking even in an old garage. Now I always check if everything is okay with my neighbors and try not to ignore strange noises. After all, who knows what could be lurking behind an ordinary door? This story has taught me that sometimes it's worth taking a little time to make sure everything is okay. After all, it could save someone's life. And as for the garage, it still stands in front of my house, and every time I walk by it, I wonder who opened that door, and if there was one at all. Sometimes the simplest things are the most mysterious, and we may never know the truth